The heavy weight of betrayal pressed on my chest like 100 stones as I watched her walk out of our bedroom, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. My husband, the man I had fought for years to keep alive, the man I had sacrificed everything for, my health, my sanity, my very soul. I had just come out of surgery, fighting for my life after a brutal illness, and this was how I was repaid. There she was, Amara, a woman I had trusted, a woman who had sat at my dinner table, a woman I had even helped with her career. I watched as she smiled up at him, her hand in his, as they turned away without a second glance at the woman who had been by his side for over a decade. How dare they? I should have been the one by his side in that moment. I should have been the one to walk out of that hospital room, not her. And yet, in that moment, the bitterness of their betrayal stung more than any physical pain I had endured. The man I had built a life with, the man I had fought for, the man I loved, he had betrayed me with the one person I thought I could trust. I sank to the bed, my body trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. I was still weak from the operation, but a fire burned deep within me, one that would not be extinguished by a mere betrayal. I had lost everything, but I had one thing they didn't: power. The $1 billion property my husband had always dreamed of, the one I had inherited after the death of my father, was still in my hands, and it was mine to control. But how did it come to this? How did I, Lola, a woman who had built a life of trust and love, become the victim in this twisted game? Let me take you back. It all started when my father, Chief Naji, passed away unexpectedly. The world had felt like it was crashing down on me as I tried to juggle my role as his sole heir, my marriage, and the constant battle with my health. But in the midst of it all, my husband David had been my rock. At least that's what I thought. When he first learned about the inheritance, about the land and properties stretching across Lagos and beyond, he had been ecstatic. He could taste the success already. But I never expected that it would become the thing that tore us apart. David was ambitious, driven by the thought of wealth. He wasn't always like this, but as the years passed, I saw the hunger in his eyes, a hunger that was never satisfied. And then there was Amara, a young, beautiful woman who had become a close friend, someone I thought I could trust with everything. How could I have been so wrong? But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that David didn't just betray me with Amara. He had been plotting to take control of everything I had worked so hard to build. Everything I had inherited from my father, including that $1 billion property, had been eyed by him for years. I had been blind to his manipulations, too focused on my own battles to see the truth. But now, with the betrayal fresh in my heart, I realized the depth of his deceit. The property had always been his goal, not my love. And now, as he walked out the door with Amara, I knew I had no choice but to fight back. And this time, I wouldn't just fight for my marriage, but for everything I had inherited. But how would I reclaim what was mine? What would you do in my shoes? The day David and Amara left, I stayed there in that sterile hospital room, staring at the white walls as if they would provide me with an answer to the whirlwind that had just turned my life upside down. I was a woman of strength, of resilience. But in that moment, I felt broken. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt numb. The nurses came in to check on me, asking if I needed anything, but I simply waved them off, my gaze never leaving the door where David and Amara had walked out. I could hear my father's voice in the back of my mind, reminding me that no matter the trials or the betrayals, a woman of strength never falters. I wasn't sure I believed that in that moment, but I held on to it. My father's voice had always been a steady presence in my life, even after his death. He was a proud man, an influential businessman, and he had always stressed the importance of family, loyalty, and legacy. As the only child, I was his heir. And while my mother had passed away years ago, I knew that my father had entrusted me with everything. But there was more than just wealth and property. There was history, there was legacy, there was a name to protect. I spent hours in that room, the clock ticking away as I wrestled with my emotions. The truth was clear now, even if I didn't want to admit it. David had been scheming for the fortune long before Amara entered the picture. She was just the catalyst. My heart ached as I realized that the man I had trusted, the man I had built a life with, wasn't who I thought he was. And Amara, she had become more than a mere betrayal. She was a symbol of everything I had lost. But then, something shifted. I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was a woman who had inherited the future, a future that David and Amara had thought they could steal from me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the power I had wasn't just in the money or the property. It was in the control I held over everything. David thought he could take it from me. He thought Amara could help him. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I had been playing the long game all along. The $1 billion property wasn't just land. It was a symbol of my family's legacy. My father had built an empire from nothing, and I was the one entrusted to protect it. While David had been blinded by greed and Amara by ambition, I had always known what was truly at stake. The property wasn't just a dream. It was a fortress, and it was mine to control. But the question was, how would I reclaim it? How would I rise from the ashes of betrayal and take back what was rightfully mine? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had the leverage, I had the resources, and I had something that David and Amara didn't. Patience. When I was well enough to leave the hospital, I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't afford to let them get too comfortable, to let them believe that they had won. I called my lawyer, Chijioki, the same one who had helped my father with all of his business dealings. He was sharp, loyal, and most importantly, discreet. I explained the situation to him, my voice steady, even though my mind was racing. He listened carefully, his silence telling me that he was already formulating a plan. "We'll need to move quickly, Lola," he said once I had finished. "They think they've outsmarted you, but they don't know the full extent of your power. We'll start by securing the property, legally. You've got the deeds, but we'll need to make sure they're untouchable." I nodded. The deeds to the property had always been in my name, but David had always tried to manipulate the documents, get me to sign things I didn't fully understand. That's where he had started his game. But now I was going to turn the tables. "Do what you need to do," I said, my voice firm, "and make sure no one else gets in the way." Chijioki assured me he would take care of everything. But I knew that reclaiming what was mine wouldn't be simple. There were people who had always been eager to see me fail, eager to see me knock down a peg. People who had always doubted me, underestimated me. I had to be careful. Over the next few days, I focused on getting stronger, physically and mentally. I started attending physical therapy, working to regain my strength, and in the meantime, I studied everything I could about the property. I needed to know every detail, every loophole, every legal recourse. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. I was fighting for my dignity, for my father's legacy. One evening, after a particularly grueling physical therapy session, I sat down with my laptop and began going through the financial records of the property. David had always handled the finances, but there was something off about the way he had organized everything. There were transactions, papers, and records that didn't add up. I realized that David had been siphoning money from the property for years, using it to fund his lifestyle, and most likely, his affair with Amara. There were wires, transfers, and accounts I didn't even recognize. The more I dug, the more I realized just how far his betrayal had gone. It wasn't just about taking control of the land anymore. It was about exposing him for the fraud he had become. And that's when I decided to play my final hand. I reached out to someone who had been in my life for a long time, someone I had trusted. It was time to bring in my father's closest associate, a man who knew the property inside and out. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a businessman in his own right, and he owed my father a favor. It was time to cash in on that favor. His name was Olamide, and he was a force to be reckoned with. I knew that if I could get him on my side, I would have the upper hand. I called him that evening, explaining everything in as much detail as I could. "I'll be there first thing in the morning," Olamide said. "You've been patient, Lola, but now it's time to take what's yours." When Olamide arrived, we went over the entire plan. He would help me secure the legalities, but we needed to make sure that no one, especially David, could access the property without my approval. We also discussed a strategic move that would hit David where it hurt the most, his business empire. I had always known he had ambitions to expand, to build on my father's legacy, but now I was going to ensure that he wouldn't get the chance to do so. But as we discussed the next steps, I couldn't help but wonder, would David and Amara really back down, or would they fight until the very end? The battle for the property had just begun, and I was ready to take it to the next level. The sun had barely risen, but I was already deep into the paperwork, my eyes scanning every line, every detail. I had always been a quick learner when it came to business, but this was different. This was personal. I needed to ensure that no stone was left unturned, no loophole overlooked. David thought he could manipulate the situation, but he underestimated how far I was willing to go. As Olamide sat across from me in my study, we discussed the next steps with a calm determination. His presence, always composed, gave me a sense of focus. He was a man who didn't rush decisions, and that was exactly what I needed. "Lola, the first thing we need to do is freeze all financial activity related to the property," Olamide said, tapping his pen against the table. "That includes any accounts that David has access to. We'll cut off his access, and if he tries to pull anything, he'll have to explain to the authorities." I nodded. It was a sound strategy, but I knew it would take time to implement. We had to be discreet. David had a vast network of people at his disposal, and any sudden moves could tip him off. We needed to control the narrative, and we needed to do it quietly. I had always been strategic, patient, but there was a sense of urgency now, an urgency that wasn't just driven by revenge. I could feel the weight of my father's legacy pressing down on me. He had built this empire with integrity, with sacrifice. I couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands, not now, not when I was in a position to protect it. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and legal maneuvering. Chijioke was working tirelessly on the legal front, making sure everything was in place. But David, it seemed, wasn't giving up without a fight. One afternoon, while I was going through the financial statements, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. "Lola, you won't get away with this. David and I have already made our plans. You think you can control everything, but you're wrong." The message sent a chill down my spine. Amara. It had to be her. I could almost hear her voice through the text, laced with venom and arrogance. She was just as deluded as David. She thought this was a game, but she had no idea what she was up against. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Olamide. His response was swift and to the point. "They're trying to intimidate you, Lola. Don't let them get into your head. We'll move forward with the plan. Keep your focus." I took a deep breath and turned my attention back to the task at hand. I knew they were watching me, waiting for me to slip up. But they didn't understand how deep my roots ran. This wasn't just about the property. It was about power, about control. And I wasn't about to lose either of them. That evening, after a long day of strategizing, I sat alone in my living room, the weight of the situation settling in. I stared out the window, looking at the skyline of Lagos, the city I had always loved. It was beautiful, vibrant, alive with possibility. But now, it felt distant, like a world I couldn't fully connect with anymore. My thoughts were consumed by the upcoming battle, and I wondered how far David and Amara would go to get what they wanted. The next morning, Chijioke called with news. "Lola, the paperwork has been processed. The accounts have been frozen. David can't access the property or any of your assets without going through us now." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. This was just the beginning. I still had to deal with David's reaction. He wasn't going to let this go easily, and I knew that if I didn't act quickly, he would find another way to regain control. I had a decision to make. It was just past noon when I received another call, this time from my lawyer, Olamide. His voice was calm, but there was an urgency in his tone. "We need to meet. It's about David. He's making a move, and it's bigger than we thought. You need to be prepared for what's coming next." I immediately agreed to meet him. The more I heard, the more I realized how deep the deception ran. David wasn't just trying to take the property. He was trying to sabotage everything I had worked for, my reputation, my legacy. He had begun spreading lies about me, rumors designed to discredit me and turn public opinion in his favor. He wanted to destroy my credibility, make me seem unstable, unfit to handle my father's estate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. David was going to extreme lengths, and I realized that this battle would take everything I had. But I had a weapon of my own, something that David and Amara didn't expect. As Olamide and I sat in the small cafe, he laid out the details of David's plan. He's planning to challenge the will. He's hired a team of lawyers to make sure the inheritance is invalidated. If he succeeds, he could claim everything. I stared at Olamide, disbelief washing over me. How can he do that? The will is ironclad. My father's signature is on everything. He's wasting his time. Olamide leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Lola, they've found a loophole. They're trying to say that your father wasn't of sound mind when he made the will. They'll argue that your illness made him vulnerable to manipulation. You're going to have to prove them wrong." A wave of anger surged through me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my father's integrity, his memory. How dare they tarnish everything he had worked for? "I'm not going to let them do this," I said, my voice steady. "I'll fight this with everything I have." Olamide nodded. "And you will win. But we need to act fast. We need to find the evidence, the witnesses who can testify about your father's state of mind when he made the will. This isn't going to be easy, but it's not impossible." That was the moment I realized how far David and Amara were willing to go. They thought they could take everything from me, my husband, my inheritance, my reputation. But they didn't understand one thing. I would fight back, no matter what. But as I left the cafe, a thought lingered in the back of my mind. Was this going to be the final test of my strength? Or was I walking into something far more dangerous than I realized? The tension in the air felt heavier than ever as I prepared for the battle ahead. Every step I took in the days following my meeting with Olamide was calculated, deliberate. I had already endured so much, and the thought of losing everything, my father's legacy, my wealth, my dignity, was unbearable. I had a plan, but in the back of my mind I couldn't shake the feeling that David and Amara were only getting started. They weren't going to back down easily. It was late one evening when I received another unexpected message. This one wasn't from Amara or David, but from a trusted old friend, Chijioke. His message was short, but to the point. "Lola, it's urgent. We need to meet. Something has come up." I didn't hesitate. I knew that when Chijioke reached out, it was never without reason. He was the kind of man who could keep a cool head even in the most dire situations, and his words only confirmed the gravity of what I was about to face. I arrived at his office, my mind racing, and found him waiting for me with a serious look on his face. He wasted no time. "I've just received word from one of my sources in the legal system," he said, his voice low. "David has filed for a temporary injunction. He's trying to prevent you from selling or transferring any assets while the case is pending. He's hoping to gain control of everything before the court makes a ruling." I stared at him, trying to process the information. "What do you mean, gain control? The property is mine, it's legally mine. He can't just take it." Chijioke's expression darkened. "David knows this, Lola, but he's not just fighting for the money, he's trying to take away your credibility, your reputation. If he can prove that you're emotionally unstable or incapable of managing the estate, he can take control. He'll claim that the stress of the illness made you vulnerable, and he'll fight tooth and nail to paint you as unfit." My heart sank. It was exactly what I had feared. This was more than a legal battle. This was a war for everything I had ever worked for, everything I had ever known. David wasn't just trying to steal my inheritance. He was trying to destroy me completely. I sat back in my chair, struggling to gather my thoughts. This wasn't just about proving that I was the rightful heir. This was about proving my worth, my ability to control the future my father had left behind. Chijioke continued, his voice steady but urgent. We need to move quickly. I've started gathering the necessary documents and witnesses, but we'll need more time. David's team is already building a case. We're going to have to outsmart him, use the law to our advantage. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. How do we proceed? We need to find the loopholes in his case, Lola. Find the evidence that will prove your father's mind was clear when he made the will. I've already spoken to some of the people who were close to him, his lawyer, his business partners. We'll need their testimonies, but we'll need someone with legal authority who can confirm your father's mental state at the time. It was clear to me now. This wasn't just about money or property. It was a battle of wills. And David had underestimated me. I had always believed in my strength, in my ability to overcome challenges. But this was different. This was a test of my very identity. Who was I without my legacy? Who was I without the empire my father had built? And more importantly, who was I if I let David take it all away from me? We'll fight this, Chijioke, I said, standing up from my chair, my voice unwavering. We'll fight with everything we have, and we'll win. He smiled, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. I never doubted you for a second, Lola. But we need to be careful. David has his own set of tricks, and Amara, she's not just a pawn in this game. She's dangerous. I frowned, wondering just how deep Amara's involvement really went. I had always believed her to be an innocent bystander, a woman who had been lured in by David's promises. But now, I wasn't so sure. There was something more at play here, something I hadn't yet fully grasped. As I left Chijioke's office, my mind was buzzing with possibilities. I knew this battle was going to be long and hard, but I also knew that it was one I couldn't afford to lose. My future, my father's legacy, everything I had worked for was on the line. And David, no matter how powerful he thought he was not going to take it from me. The following week, things began to escalate. David and Amara were relentless. They had hired an entire legal team to fight for control, and with every passing day I could feel the pressure mounting. But there was something I hadn't counted on. Amara was more than just a collaborator. She was a strategist in her own right, and as I uncovered more details about her past, I began to realize just how much she had manipulated David into doing her bidding. I could almost hear her voice in my head, her words laced with the same arrogance and ambition that had driven David to betray me. You'll never see it coming, Lola. Everything you've built, everything you've fought for, it's all mine now. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I couldn't. In the midst of all this chaos, I received another unexpected message, this time from someone I hadn't heard from in years, my childhood friend Amina. She was someone who had always had a sharp mind for business, someone who had seen the world from a different perspective. And now, after all this time, she was reaching out to help. I heard about what's happening, her message read. I know what David is trying to do. I can help you. Let's meet. I didn't hesitate. Amina was one of the few people I trusted, and if she had information that could help, I wasn't going to turn it down. When we met, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've been following David's moves closely, Lola, she said, her voice steady but filled with intensity. What you don't know is that Amara has her own stake in this. She's been working with David on something much bigger. It's not just about taking control of the property, it's about undermining you, taking your place in the business world. Amara has her own ambitions, and she's using David to get there. The realization hit me like a wave. Amara wasn't just a woman trying to get her hands on what was mine. She was trying to take everything from me, not just the property, but the legacy my father had left behind. She was trying to erase me. and that was something I would never allow. A heavy silence lingered between Amina and me as the weight of her words settled in. Amara wasn't just an opportunist trying to ride on David's coattails. She was the mastermind behind the entire plot, the person pulling the strings from behind the scenes. It felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me, and I was left floundering in a sea of lies and betrayal. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This changes everything." Amina nodded solemnly. "I've known Amara for years. She's not as innocent as she seems. She's smart, manipulative, and she's been waiting for the right moment to make her move. I've seen the way she operates. She's never satisfied with just enough, and now she's got David on her side thinking he's winning." I felt a rush of anger surge through me. I had trusted Amara. I had brought her into my home, shared my life with her, and now she was trying to destroy everything I held dear. But more than that, I was furious with David. He had allowed this to happen, had let his greed blind him to the damage he was causing. All for what? To take control of a fortune he never deserved? "We need to outsmart them," I said, my voice hardening with resolve. "I won't let them take everything. Not after everything I've been through. Not after what my father built." Amina's eyes softened with empathy. "I know. That's why I'm here. I've been looking into Amara's past, trying to find something, anything that could help us. She's not as untouchable as she thinks." "Do you have anything?" I asked, leaning in closer. "We need to act fast. David and Amara won't stop. They'll do anything to take control of the property." Amina paused for a moment, then handed me a thick folder. "This is everything I've gathered on Amara. Her financial records, her connections, the people she's been working with. It's not a lot, but it's something." I opened the folder, scanning the documents quickly. There were bank statements, emails, and receipts. Nothing incriminating, but enough to raise questions. There were also names, people who had worked with Amara in the past, people who owed her favors. It was clear she had a network, and now that network was helping her take everything from me. "This isn't just about money, is it?" I asked, my thoughts racing. "She wants my place in the business world. She wants my legacy. She doesn't just want the property, she wants to erase me." Amina's expression was grim. "Exactly. She's trying to become the next version of your father. But she's going about it all wrong. She doesn't understand the first thing about running this empire. She thinks it's all about money and power. She doesn't know what it takes to lead." I nodded slowly, a sense of clarity starting to form in my mind. It wasn't just about the property. It wasn't just about taking control of the land or the money. Amara wanted everything I had worked for, everything my father had built, and she was using David to get it. But what Amara didn't know was that I wasn't going to let her have it. Not without a fight. Not without exposing everything she had done to tear me down. "I'm going to take this to the next level," I said, my voice steady, determined. "I'll use everything she's done to destroy me against her. We'll find a way to bring her down, expose her for the fraud she is. We'll use her own tactics against her." Amina looked at me with admiration. "I knew you had it in you, Lola. You're stronger than she thinks, but we need to be careful. She's not someone to underestimate." "I know," I said, standing up. "But I'm not going to sit back and let her take what's mine. I've fought too hard for this, and I will fight until the very end." Amina stood with me, her eyes filled with resolve. "I'm with you, Lola. We'll take her down. Together." Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly with Amina and Chijioke, gathering everything we needed to take down David and Amara. The evidence Amina had gathered on Amara's past was invaluable, and we started to build a case against her. We uncovered shady financial dealings, hidden accounts, and connections to people who had been involved in illegal activities. It was enough to prove that Amara had been involved in a web of deceit long before she came into my life. But we knew it wouldn't be easy. David was not going to give up without a fight. He was desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. We had to be strategic, methodical. Every move had to be calculated. Then one day, just as we were preparing to present our findings to the authorities, I received another message from David. It was a brief text, but it sent a chill down my spine. "Lola, you've made a big mistake. You can't stop this. I'm coming for everything you have. And I will win." I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers gripping the phone tightly. David was confident. He believed that he had already won. But what he didn't know was that I had been playing him from the very beginning. He thought that by using Amara he could break me. He thought that by controlling the property, he could control me. But he was wrong. I wasn't just fighting for the property. I was fighting for my identity, for my legacy, for everything that my father had left me. And now, the final pieces were falling into place. I was ready for what was coming next. I would take back what was mine. I would expose David and Amara for the frauds they were. And in the end, I would be the one standing victorious. The tension in the air was palpable as the days leading up to the court date grew nearer. My every move felt like it was under the microscope, and I knew David and Amara were waiting for me to slip up. But I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. I had faced obstacles before, and I was not going to back down now. I spent long hours with Chijioke and Amina, refining our strategy, double-checking the evidence and ensuring that every detail was airtight. The more we uncovered, the more we realized just how far David and Amara had gone to steal everything I held dear. They thought they could break me. They thought they could outsmart me. But they hadn't reckoned with the fire that burned inside me. David's message had only fueled that fire. It reminded me that this battle wasn't just about the property. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with all the possibilities, with all the twists and turns this battle could take. I was anxious, yes, but also resolute. I had come too far to turn back now. I spent long hours with Chijioke and Amina, refining our strategy, double-checking the evidence, and ensuring that every detail was airtight. The more we uncovered, the more we realized just how far David and Amara had gone to steal everything I held dear. They thought they could break me. They thought they could outsmart me. But they hadn't reckoned with the fire that burned inside me. David's message had only fueled that fire. It reminded me that this battle wasn't just about the property. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with all the possibilities, with all the twists and turns this battle could take. I was anxious, yes, but also resolute. I had come too far to turn back now. As I sat by my window, looking out over the city that had been both my home and my battleground, I thought about the woman I had been before all of this, before the betrayal, before the sickness, before the fight for my inheritance. I had been strong, but I had also been naive. I had trusted David with everything, my heart, my life, my future. And he had used that trust to manipulate me, to control me. But now, I was done with being manipulated. I was taking control back. The next morning, the courtroom felt like a battlefield. The air was thick with tension, the opposing sides glaring at each other across the room. David sat there, his face hard and cold, Amara beside him, her eyes flashing with smug confidence. They thought they had already won. But they didn't know the full extent of what I had in store. Chijioke was at my side, his presence reassuring. He had always been a calm and collected figure, but today, even he could feel the weight of the stakes. Amina, too, was there, her sharp mind ready to help in any way she could. We had done everything right. The evidence was in our favor. But there was one thing I had learned in all my years of navigating the business world. Anything could happen in the courtroom. Anything. The judge called the proceedings to order, and my heart pounded in my chest. I had been through many negotiations, but nothing like this. This wasn't just about money. It was about my entire future, my father's legacy, the property that had been in my family for generations. It was all on the line. David's lawyer stood up first, confidently presenting their case. They argued that I was mentally unfit to manage the estate, citing my recent illness and the stress I had been under. They even went so far as to claim that my condition made me vulnerable to manipulation, that I had been coerced into making the decisions I had about the property. They painted me as weak, unstable, and unfit. As the lawyer spoke, I felt my anger rising. They were lying. They were twisting the truth to suit their narrative. But I kept my composure. I had to. This was just the opening salvo, and I was ready for it. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my voice steady and strong. Your Honor, I stand before you today not just as a woman fighting for her inheritance, but as a daughter, a mother, and a person who has spent her life building something meaningful. My father left me this estate not because he thought I was weak, but because he knew I could carry on his legacy. I could see the judge watching me closely, and for a moment, I allowed myself to look over at David and Amara. Their smug expressions hadn't wavered. They thought they had the upper hand. But I wasn't done yet. I have been through many hardships in my life, I continued. I've fought for my health, for my family, and for everything I hold dear, and I will not allow anyone to take what's rightfully mine, no matter what lies they spread. This property isn't just about money. It's about my father's legacy. It's about what he built for me and for my future. There was a quiet murmur in the courtroom, but I didn't break my gaze from David and Amara. This wasn't just about proving I was fit to manage the estate. It was about showing them that they couldn't break me, that I was stronger than they thought. David's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up a hand, signaling for silence. I knew I had struck a nerve. The next hour was a blur of legal jargon, witnesses, and arguments. Chijioke and I had prepared for this. We had witnesses who could testify to my father's mental state when he made the will. We had evidence that proved my illness hadn't impaired my ability to make decisions. We had a plan, and we were executing it perfectly. But just when I thought things were going in our favor, David made a shocking move. His lawyer stood up and presented new evidence. Documents that claimed I had signed away my rights to the property years ago. Documents that seemed to show my signature agreeing to transfer the estate to David. My heart sank. I hadn't signed any such document. I had been careful, always. How could this be happening? I looked over at David, who was sitting with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold determination. I knew this was his doing. He had forged those documents. He was trying to take everything from me, by any means necessary. My mind raced, but I knew what I had to do. I had to prove that those documents were forged. That's when I remembered something crucial that I had overlooked. My father had kept meticulous records of every transaction, every signature, and one of those records had a digital backup, proof that the documents presented by David were fakes. I turned to Chijioke, who was already a step ahead. He had anticipated this move. I've got it, he whispered, pulling out his phone. We'll need to get the digital record into the judge's hands. The next few minutes felt like a lifetime, but when the judge reviewed the evidence, it was clear that the documents were indeed forged. David's face fell, and I could see the shock in his eyes. He had miscalculated. He had thought he could pull this off, but he had underestimated me. The judge turned to David and Amara. I find that the documents presented by the defense are fraudulent. This case will continue based on the original will. The property and assets remain under the control of Lola Naji. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but I hardly heard them. All I could focus on was the look on David's face, the look of defeat. As I left the courtroom, a sense of triumph washed over me. It wasn't over yet. I knew David would fight again, but this victory was a step in the right direction. I had exposed his lies, and I had won this round. But I couldn't afford to relax just yet. The real battle had only just begun, and I had every intention of finishing it. The victory in court was sweet, but it was short-lived. As I walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by my team and the press, I could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. The battle wasn't over. I had won a significant victory, yes, but David wasn't the type to back down easily. He would be planning his next move, and I had to be ready. I spent the following days in a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and legal consultations. My lawyer, Chijioke, had been the backbone of this whole process, his calm and methodical approach keeping me grounded. But now I knew I needed to take charge. I couldn't rely solely on legal loopholes or the courts. I had to outthink David and Amara at every turn. We were all still on edge, knowing that they would stop at nothing to gain control of what was rightfully mine. But I had one thing they didn't. I knew the business. I knew how to navigate the complexities of my father's empire better than anyone else. The only difference now was that I wasn't alone. I had the strength of my family legacy behind me, and I would use it to its fullest. That evening, as I sat alone in my office, reviewing more documents and strategies, I received a call from Amina. Her voice was urgent, and I could sense the tension on the other end of the line. "Lola, we found something," she said, her voice filled with both excitement and concern. "Something big. You need to come to the office right away." I didn't waste any time. I knew that Amina's instincts had never been wrong. I grabbed my coat and rushed to her office, my heart racing with anticipation. When I arrived, she was waiting for me, her face grave but determined. "What is it?" I asked, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Amina handed me a folder and I opened it without hesitation. Inside were more financial records, bank transfers, and contracts, documents that I had never seen before. But there was one document that caught my eye. A transaction record for a company that David had been involved with, one that I knew very little about. "This company," I said, my voice trailing off as I read the name. "I've never heard of it before. What does this have to do with David?" Amina looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and shock. "David has been funneling money through this company, a lot of money, and it's all linked to a series of shady business deals and investments, most of them illegal." I felt my blood run cold. "You're saying he's been laundering money?" Amina nodded grimly. "Yes. But it gets worse. This company is connected to Amara, too. She's been involved in some of these deals from the start. They've been working together for years, using this company to hide their illegal activities." My mind raced as I processed the information. This was more than just a fight over property. David and Amara had been running a criminal enterprise behind the scenes, using the property as a front. They had been siphoning money, laundering it through fake companies, and hiding their tracks as they built their fortune. They thought they could get away with it, but they hadn't anticipated me uncovering their lies. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Amina's expression was dark. "Longer than we thought. They've been moving money through this company for years, using it to finance their lifestyle. But it's all starting to unravel now. If we can get this information into the right hands, we can take them down." I stood up, feeling a surge of adrenaline rush through me. This wasn't just about protecting my father's legacy anymore. This was about exposing David and Amara for the criminals they were. "We're going to bring them down," I said, my voice filled with resolve. "We're going to show the world who they really are." The next few days were a blur of action. We gathered evidence, contacted the authorities, and began building our case against David and Amara. Chijioke worked tirelessly to ensure that every document, every piece of evidence, was airtight. Amina and I worked behind the scenes, putting together a strategy that would expose the extent of their criminal activities. But even as we moved forward with our plans, I knew that David and Amara were plotting their next move. They were dangerous, cunning, and relentless. I couldn't afford to let my guard down for a second. It wasn't until I received an unexpected phone call that I realized just how dangerous they could be. "Lola," a familiar voice said on the other end, "we need to talk." It was David. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I was paralyzed with shock. What could he possibly want now? After everything that had happened, after all the lies, the betrayal, why was he calling me? What is it, David? I asked, my voice cold and guarded. I know what you've been doing, he said, his tone low and menacing. And I'm not going to let you ruin everything I've worked for. You don't understand the consequences of your actions, Lola. I clenched my fists, refusing to let his words rattle me. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm not the one who's been ruining lives, David. That's all on you. He let out a bitter laugh. You think you're in control? You think you can just take everything from me? You're wrong. You're too weak to stop me. I'll make sure you lose everything. The anger in his voice was unmistakable, but there was something else, something colder. He wasn't just trying to intimidate me. He was threatening me. I've already won, David, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. And I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. Your game is up. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he was going to hang up. But then, he spoke again, his voice tinged with something darker. You don't know who you're dealing with, Lola. But you will. Soon enough. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there in shock, my mind racing. What had he meant by that? What kind of danger was he threatening now? I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had to focus. I had to be prepared for whatever David and Amara were planning next. This was no longer just a battle over money or property. This was a battle for survival, and I was ready to fight. To the very end. The threat from David hung over me like a shadow, one I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching my every move, waiting for me to slip. But I had made it this far, and I wasn't about to let fear dictate my next steps. We were getting closer to the final showdown, and I could feel the tension building like the calm before a storm. David's warning still echoed in my ears. You don't know who you're dealing with. His words had struck me harder than I cared to admit, but I wasn't going to let him scare me. I wasn't the naive woman I had been when I first married him. I had learned to navigate this world with precision, and now, it was my turn to make the moves. Amina and Chijioke were by my side, their loyalty unshakable. Together we had uncovered more about David and Amara's criminal activities. Every piece of evidence we gathered painted a clearer picture of their deceit. I had all the tools I needed to take them down. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. David wasn't just fighting for control of the property anymore. He was fighting for his freedom, and he was willing to do whatever it took to keep it. I had been cautious, but now I knew that caution was no longer enough. If I was going to win this, I needed to hit them where it hurt the most, right at the heart of their operation. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with Chijioke, I sat alone in my office staring at the piles of documents. My mind raced as I tried to figure out my next move. The evidence we had was damning, but I needed something more, something that would force David and Amara to back down once and for all. Then it hit me. I had been too focused on the legal side of things. I needed to expose them to the world. I needed to make sure their actions were so public that even their wealth couldn't protect them. It was time to take control of the narrative. I picked up the phone and dialed Amina's number. She picked up after the first ring. We need to make a move, I said, my voice filled with determination. We have the evidence, but we need to make sure the public sees it. If we expose them, they'll have nowhere to hide. Amina was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice resolute. I agree, but we need to be careful. If they know we're coming after them publicly, they'll fight back with everything they have. I know, I said, but we've come too far to stop now. We have to put pressure on them, Amina. We can't let them win. Amina didn't hesitate. I'll start working on it. We'll get the media involved and we'll make sure the right people see the truth, but we have to be strategic. We can't let them turn this into a media circus. We need to control the story. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of purpose settle over me. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. No longer would I be the victim. No longer would I sit back and let David and Amara take what was mine. It was time to expose them, to tear down the facade they had built. The following days were a blur of preparation. Amina worked tirelessly behind the scenes, contacting journalists and influential figures who could help us spread the word. Chijioke was working on legal strategies to ensure we could keep the pressure on them. But even as we worked to prepare for the next phase, I knew David and Amara would be scrambling to cover their tracks. They weren't going to let this go without a fight. Then the phone call I had been dreading came. It was David. "I know what you're planning, Lola," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "And you won't get away with it. You think you can expose me? You think you can destroy everything I've built? You're wrong, you're playing a dangerous game." I felt my pulse quicken. "You've been playing the dangerous game, David, and now it's time for the world to see you for who you really are." David laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "You don't understand, Lola. You think I'm the one who's been playing with fire, but you've underestimated me. I've been preparing for this, and when it's all over, I'll be the one standing on top. Not you, not your little empire. Me." I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of anger rise within me. "You've lost, David. The court has already ruled in my favor. The property is mine, and you're going down. No matter what you try, you'll never take it from me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when David spoke again, his voice was laced with venom. "We'll see about that. You think you can expose me? Fine. But remember, Lola, you're not just fighting for a property. You're fighting for your own reputation, and when this is over, you'll be the one everyone remembers as the woman who lost it all." Before I could respond, he hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. His words lingered in my mind, echoing in the silence of my office. He was right about one thing. This was no longer just about property. It was about my reputation, my legacy. If I lost this fight, everything I had worked for, everything my father had built, would be destroyed. But I wasn't about to let that happen. Not now. Not ever. I picked up the phone again, this time calling Amina. "It's time," I said, my voice steady. "We expose them. We go public with everything. Let the world see what they've been hiding." Amina's voice was sharp with determination. "I'm ready. Let's make sure the truth is the one thing they can't escape." And so, the plan was set in motion. With Amina's connections, we started reaching out to the media, ensuring that our story would be told. We didn't hold back. The world would know the truth about David and Amara, about their deceit, their manipulation, and their crimes. The days that followed were filled with a sense of anticipation. As the media picked up on our story, the pressure on David and Amara began to build. The first public report was published, detailing their fraudulent activities, their illegal business dealings, and their attempts to steal my inheritance. The news spread like wildfire, and within hours the authorities were involved. David tried to fight back, of course. He had his lawyers issue statements, trying to discredit me, trying to turn the narrative in his favor. But the truth was out now. There was no going back. I sat in my office watching the media coverage unfold. I knew this wasn't the end. David and Amara would fight back. They would try to claw their way back to the top. But they had underestimated me. I wasn't just fighting for property. I was fighting for my life, for my future, and for everything I had worked for, and I would win. The days following the media frenzy were a whirlwind of activity. News outlets were buzzing with the story, broadcasting every detail of David and Amara's deceit to the world. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about their complete betrayal of me, their attempt to manipulate the system and take what didn't belong to them. The public was turning against them, and I could see the cracks beginning to show, but with every victory came a new challenge. David wasn't the type to give up without a fight, and he wasn't going to let me win without using every weapon in his arsenal. He had already hired a new team of lawyers, and I could sense his desperation in the way he lashed out at anyone who questioned his actions. He tried to regain control of the narrative, using the media to his advantage, calling me unstable, and accusing me of fabricating the whole story. But no matter how many lies he told, the truth was out, and it was undeniable. In the midst of all this chaos, I received an unexpected visitor, Olamide, the man who had been my father's closest associate. He had always been a figure I could count on, someone who had helped my father navigate the world of business. And now, as the storm raged around me, I knew he was the ally I needed more than ever. Olamide's presence was a calm in the storm. He walked into my office, his sharp eyes taking in the sight of me sitting behind my desk fully in control. He smiled at me, the kind of smile that spoke volumes, of respect, of understanding, and most importantly, of shared purpose. "You've done well, Lola," he said, his voice low but filled with admiration. "You've played this game better than anyone expected." I gave him a small smile. "I'm not done yet, Olamide. We've only just begun." He nodded. "That's what I want to talk to you about." David's move was predictable, but it's only the beginning. Amara, she's the real wild card in all of this. She's dangerous, and I'm not sure she's done fighting yet. I leaned forward, a sudden sense of unease creeping over me. "What do you mean?" Olamide's expression darkened as he sat down across from me. "I've been looking into her background, into her dealings. There's more to her than meets the eye. She's been using David to build her own empire, and she's not going to let you take him down that easily." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What are you saying?" Olamide leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Amara has her own plans. She's been quietly building alliances, pulling strings behind the scenes. David might be her puppet, but she's the one who's been pulling the strings." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been focused on David, on his attempts to destroy me, but I had failed to see the bigger picture. Amara wasn't just a bystander in this game. She was the mastermind. And if I didn't deal with her, I was fighting a battle I might not be able to win. "We need to find out everything we can about her, Olamide. If she's as dangerous as you say, we can't afford to let her make the next move." Olamide nodded. "I'm already working on it. I'll get you the information you need. But you need to be careful, Lola. Amara is more than just a rival, she's a threat." The weight of his words settled over me. I had underestimated Amara, believing her to be just a pawn in David's game. But now I saw her for what she truly was, a woman driven by ambition, willing to do anything to get what she wanted. I spent the next few days in a frenzy, poring over the new information Olamide had gathered. The more I dug, the darker the picture became. Amara wasn't just involved in shady business deals. She was linked to a network of powerful individuals, some of them with connections to criminal enterprises, some with influence in the highest circles of government. She wasn't just trying to take the property from me. She was trying to take everything, my reputation, my legacy, and my future. But I wasn't about to let her win. I wasn't going to let her use David as a pawn in her game. It was time to take the fight to her. The night before our final strategy meeting, I sat alone in my office, staring at the documents spread out before me. I had learned everything I could about Amara and her dealings, and I knew that I had to act fast. If I didn't, she would find a way to turn the tide in her favor, and everything I had worked for would be lost. I had one final card to play, and I was ready to use it. But I knew I had to be careful. Amara was cunning. She would see any move I made, and if I wasn't prepared, I would walk right into her trap. I stood up from my desk, looking out the window at the city below. The lights of Lagos twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the empire my father had built, the empire I had inherited, the future I was fighting for. Tomorrow, we would make our move. Tomorrow, Amara would realize that she had underestimated me. She had thought she could take everything from me, but she had forgotten one thing. I had everything she wanted, and more. The day of the final confrontation arrived. The meeting was set. Amara, David, Olamide, and I. It would be the moment where everything came to a head. I had no intention of backing down, no intention of letting them control my future. As I walked into the meeting room, I could feel the weight of the situation. Amara sat across from me, her eyes cold and calculating. David was beside her, his face grim, as if he knew the end was near. "You think you've won, Lola?" Amara's voice was like ice, her gaze never leaving mine. "I'm not here to win," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to take back what's mine. You can't steal my legacy. You can't take my future." Amara smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "You really think you have control, don't you? You've been playing catch-up this whole time, Lola. You never saw the bigger picture." "I see it now," I replied, my tone sharp. "And I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've worked for." The tension in the room was thick, a quiet storm building between us all. Amara's smug smile never faltered as she leaned back in her chair, her fingers delicately tracing the edge of the folder in front of her. But I could see it in her eyes. Her confidence was starting to waver. She hadn't anticipated me coming this far. She thought she had already won. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't going to let her take my legacy without a fight. Not this time. David sat beside her, his face still hard, but there was something in his posture, something I couldn't quite read. Guilt? Regret? Or perhaps it was fear. The fact that he didn't speak, didn't look me in the eye, told me everything I needed to know. His betrayal, his involvement in this mess, had been eating away at him, and he knew this was it, the final battle. Olamide, ever the strategist, stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the room. He knew as well as I did that this was the moment. If we didn't seal the deal today, David and Amara would find a way to wiggle out of this. Amara's voice broke through the silence, calm but taunting. "You've made your move, Lola, but you're playing a dangerous game. You think you can expose me, destroy everything I've worked for? You think you can stand in my way?" I stood tall, my gaze steady. "This isn't about what you've worked for, Amara. This is about what you've stolen from me. You've been playing a game of deception, using David to take control of something that's never been yours. But it ends today." David finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You've lost, Lola. This is over. You don't understand who you're dealing with." I turned to him, my gaze cold. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You've been a puppet all along, David. And now you've realized that the strings are being cut, you can't escape it." Amara let out a bitter laugh, her eyes narrowing. "You think you've won, but you're wrong. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "I know exactly what you're capable of," I replied, my voice growing stronger. "I've seen it. The lies, the manipulation, the deceit. You used David as a pawn in your game, but you've underestimated me. You think you can walk away with everything, but you can't. Not anymore." There was a long pause. The room was silent, each of us weighing the other's words, trying to gauge who would make the next move. I could feel the weight of everything on my shoulders, my father's legacy, my future, my reputation. But it wasn't just about the property anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and showing them both that they could never take from me again. Olamide stepped forward, his voice firm and commanding. "We have everything we need to prove that your business dealings, Amara, have been fraudulent. We've got witnesses, financial records, the evidence to show that you've been running an illegal operation from the start. Your schemes, your manipulation, it's all on the table now." Amara's face paled slightly, but her expression quickly hardened again. She straightened in her chair, her hands tightening around the folder. "You think you've won because you've got a few pieces of paper? This is far from over. I will make sure you pay for this. I will make sure that everyone knows exactly who you are, Lola." I took a step forward, my eyes locked onto hers. "You've already lost. There's nothing you can do to take this away from me. You've been exposed. The truth is out. And now you have to face the consequences of your actions." The tension in the room was unbearable. Every nerve in my body screamed for resolution, for finality. This had been my father's empire, my inheritance, my legacy, and I would not let it fall into the hands of someone who had betrayed everything it stood for. Amara stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She shot me one last venomous look before turning to David. "I'll make sure you regret this, David," she spat. "You think you're getting away with it? You're wrong." David didn't respond. He didn't say a word, just sat there, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the floor. The room went silent again. It was almost as if time had stopped. Then, finally, David looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Fear? Or maybe it was guilt. I could see it now. The weight of what he had done to me, to us, was too much for him to bear. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I've made a mess of everything." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. All the anger, all the betrayal, everything I had carried with me for so long, it bubbled to the surface. But when I spoke, it wasn't with bitterness. It wasn't with hatred. "It's too late for apologies, David," I said softly. "The damage has been done. The truth has come out, and no amount of regret will change that." Amara's face twisted with rage, but I didn't flinch. I knew this was the moment, my moment. The battle had been long and hard, but this was it. This was the end of the road for them. I turned to Olamide, who had been watching everything unfold with careful eyes. He gave me a single nod of approval. "We'll make sure this is settled," he said, his voice firm. "The authorities will be involved. The evidence will be presented, and this will be over." The finality in his voice settled over me like a weight lifted from my shoulders. It was done. This was the last piece of the puzzle. The fight was over, and I had won. As Amara stormed out of the room, cursing under her breath, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. David sat there, his eyes still cast downward, as if he couldn't bear to face what he had done. I didn't have time to dwell on the past. I had more important things to focus on. The property, my father's legacy, was mine once again, and I was determined to rebuild everything he had worked so hard for, only this time, I would do it on my terms. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and paperwork. David's involvement in the criminal enterprise was exposed, and he faced charges that would change the course of his life forever. Amara, too, was implicated, though she managed to slip through the cracks for the time being. But I knew she would face justice eventually. I took control of the estate, overseeing the transition with careful precision. The company was back in my hands, and with it came the responsibility of ensuring it continued to thrive. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready for the challenge. As I stood on the balcony of my family's estate, looking out over the land that had once been in jeopardy, I realized that this was more than just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming my life. I had fought for everything I had, and now, with the future before me, I was ready to rebuild. David and Amara thought they could destroy me, but in the end, it was their own greed that had brought them down. And as I stood there, breathing in the fresh air, I knew one thing for certain. I had won.